you a basic outline of what General Conference kind of is, but then also some of the context of what we'll be discussing. We hopefully will be discussing at this particular General Conference. So a General Conference in the United Methodist Church setting is a time when all of the representation of the United Methodist Church, and for us, that's global, come together, and we determine a 4-year pathway, what we call a quadrennium, that makes decisions of polity, of social principle, of different other legislation types that govern the church. And so persons who attend this are elected delegates. They are called a delegate. At our annual conference level, it's not a delegate. But here we are a delegate. We are elected through a process in the annual conference. And there's a formula as to how many from each conference that can go to this event. Now, the big drama is, of course, with this was supposed to happen in 2020, and it did not because of COVID. And so it's just been postponed and postponed. So you will see this referred to as General Conference 2020 in some places. So don't be too surprised if you see that. That's because technically we're dealing with legislation that was submitted for 2020. Now they've added some, so it's a mix. But just know if you see that, that's not a typo. That is correct. So we were elected in Michigan. We kind of elected a year before we needed to, just so that we could ease in and settle into our roles. So we've been delegates for a very long time, 6 and 7 years for most of us, which is a long time. Usually it's like 3 years that you. And in that period of time, we have seen a lot of changes and a lot of things that we've gone through, especially here in the United States. It's been kind of a rocky road. Our goal in 2 weeks, or almost 2 weeks now, April 22nd, we'll all come together in Charlotte, North Carolina, is to have as many of the delegates who are elected there as possible. And I say that in all earnest because it's not easy these days getting our global partners and siblings here. It's hard to get those visas now, much harder than it's ever been. And the goal is to get everyone here that was elected, but the reality is there may be a few in corners of the world that could not get that visa, and that is tragic to not have their voice there. This particular General Conference has a lot of meat to it. And I think we're very optimistic about some of the things that will be before us and the changes that we'll could see in the United Methodist Church. Now, I may be a little biased. As you know, our delegation tends to be of one mind. So you will hear some of my bias as to some of the concerns that we really want to see happen, taken care of at this General Conference. And that is because we're kind of in that centric progressive mode of the church. But know that there's other perspectives as well. So I'll kind of give that disclaimer to begin with. One of the things that I realized when I was the chair of discipleship, and I am noticing now as a person in the pew, the people that are coming to our church, and a lot of new young families are walking in those doors, they are checking out who we are. They are going online. They're going to our websites. They're going to the denominational websites, and they are looking at who we are and who we stand for. So this is of a concern to us, because if we really want to get young families into our churches, any families, but specifically young families, we have to realize they're checking us out. And so it's very important for the delegation to go to General Conference knowing that we need to be the best denomination we can be for these young families and try to meet their concerns, their needs, their goals and visions for the future as we make decisions about who we are in the future. So if we look at that, I kind of say that the families that I've been in discussion with, are looking for churches that not only have a strong belief core or a belief base, but also have that alignment with justice issues that are apparent in their communities and the world, that they practice ethical decision making, that they have a commitment to a tenet of theology that is open-minded. These are the things that I'm finding when I'm in discussion with these families looking at possibly being a part of the United Methodist Church. We've gotten some bad press, and we've also gotten press that is not accurately put out there. And so it's difficult to combat that. And I'm sorry to use the word combat, but that's actually what it feels like, to try to get the real information out there. So in the process of General Conference, we have that opportunity. We have that opportunity to continually, through that 2-week period of time, really lift up to our community and the greater community who we are and who we can be. So when we look at our Wesleyan theology and our Wesley traditions, we know that we need to be more open-minded and kind of bask in that beauty of how we look at our faith. It is unique in many ways. We need to look at how in justice alignment we can be open with ministry with one another and not dictated down, which has kind of been a model in the past. We need to try to find that racial equity that gives us the balance and the beauty of different voices in our tradition. And also it's like specific legislation that might deal with justice issues. Like I'll name one of my real focuses is protecting the girl child around the world. We don't see that often here in the United States. We don't think of that as a concern, but if we look globally at what happens to girl children and not getting education or healthcare or even respect as a person, that's an important issue to me. So there's issues like that rise through legislation that make us who we are and speak to the world about what we care about and what we believe in. It also is a time for us to look at legislation and messaging from the legislation that says we're sustainable, that we are in reality of the moment of our environment and our world. And we as an organization, as a business, actually, can be sustainable. And that has great detail to it. So that's important to families and people that are looking at who we are as United Methodists. Are we living into what we say we are by being a sustainable business organization and having ethical business models? We are a business, folks. And do we live into those models that we call on other industries to do? So as United Methodist in Church and Society, we call on company or Caterpillar to have a business model that is fair and equitable and is justice and sustainable, right? Well, we have to do the same thing, and people are looking at that, and we need to have legislation that backs that. And pure and simple, are we loving one another unconditionally? And is our denomination, through our polity that we decide, are we doing that? So there are 3 basic areas that our delegation is stressing, and many of the caucuses that we consider to be moderate and progressive, I guess, but also with some conservative voices as well. 3 areas. We have a new presentation of social principles, and social principles are a part of our polity that explains some of those ways we need to live in social justice. So kind of what I just talked about, are we doing some of those things? It gives us some guidelines. Well, those social principles have been diligently worked on since the last 2016 General Conference. They've had a little extra time to fine tune it, though they had them ready for 2020. So, they did their diligent work. And the social principles, I think many of us look to more often than perhaps the Book of Discipline, which is actually the guideline. I think most of us that are justice-minded, we look to the social principles and we raise those social principles. Families that are checking who we are online or researching United Methodism, they're going to go to the social principles to see what are those issues, what are those rules for living and being in love with one another that we follow, and do we follow them? So we're excited about the social principles that are coming to us. They are more global than US centric, and they have been US centric in the past. So it's kind of fun to see the presentations being made by the Church and Society, who has worked diligently on this with some of our global partners to see how it has become more global. The other part is our book of discipline, and trying very hard to remove language that is harmful. In the past decades, we have put more language into the book of discipline that is harmful. And many of you will know that that has to do with LGBTQIA plus people, but it also has to do with other issues about abortion or divorce or rules within our pulpits. And many have felt that they don't need to be there. They weren't always there. They weren't always there. Before 1968, most of that was not there. So we're trying very hard to work moving harmful language, simplifying the book of discipline. Now, a piece of information that has been incorrectly stated is that our US book of discipline is everyone's book of discipline. It is not. So in Africa, they have books of discipline that they can live by that are in their context. In Europe, in Philippines, they do have their own books of discipline. We are not talking about that. They make that decision about their books of discipline. So that's been a little piece of information. It's been stated that what we do to this book of discipline will impact the global, piety of the church, and it will not. When we streamline that book of discipline, it will open up opportunities for us in ministry, for our clergy and our ministerial employees of the denomination, but it will also open up many, many other opportunities for ministry within the church. When you have that less definition and less rules to follow, you can be more creative and spontaneous and be in ministry in your context where you are. So here in the north central area of the United States, we walk a pathway that could be different than southeast jurisdiction. Or the Western jurisdiction, or Northeast, or South Central. We're all a little bit different. So to be able to align how we are in ministry, how you are in ministry with our context is a real gift. So we're working hard to try to remove that. It's not a simple process, but we can begin opening up those doors so that we can get that work done. And then the next one that we're really focusing on is right now, currently, the United States is not a separate central conference. It's not a separate conference. We are a global conference, which runs and bumps into the fact that Africa is a central conference. The European, there's several European, they're their own central conference. Philippines is their own central conference. We are not. So the world has to vote on our legislation. I'll use an example. So clergy pensions have to do with clergy in the United States, but the global delegations have to vote on that. Frankly, they really don't care. And probably right now, maybe a little different, but in the past, a good share of our legislation at General Conference had to do with the United States. So you can imagine bringing all of our global siblings to this country for a conference, and we're voting about our pension plans or have to do with Washington, D.C. And so in the past 4, 6, however, 8 years now, the Connectional Table, which is a global body, a leadership body in the church, and the Central Conference Matters Group, which are voices from all of those global siblings, have worked together to try to find a way to make the United States its own central conference so that we would make decisions that have to do with our context here in the United States. And obviously the big issue there is LGBTQIA plus issues. That's the one that stands out the most. That is not a simple process, but it can begin at this general conference. If this general conference says, yes, we will go on everybody's a central conference. These are the locations of them. These are how they'll be structured. Those would, if that decision goes through and we decide that perhaps this model would work, that the U.S. would be a separate conference, that would come back to the annual conferences to vote on. This is where it gets tricky. That has to pass by all the annual conferences by a majority. So even if the delegates make that decision and we pass that, it still has to go back to every annual conference to be voted on, including Africa, Europe, Philippines. And then if that passes, if that majority passes, and to be honest with you, I can't remember if it's a simple majority or not, but then we can move forward with that. So that's a really key piece. The United States becoming its own conference in the central conference, because then we could vote on those issues in the context of United States mindset and needs. And that wouldn't just be something like LGBTQIA+, it'd be many things. Many of the things that we take to Washington, D.C. or ask of our conferences here in the United States. So you can see it's a kind of a big picture and it's broad. I could lift up the books of legislation. We have probably 3,000 pages of legislation, and some of those will be removed. They're working on the process of that right now. So with the disaffiliation, a lot of those pieces of legislation no longer are really viable. They had to do with issues before disaffiliation. So some of those may be removed. Now you may ask, how does this affect you in the church? Well, it does. The context issues do. So not just the context of whether we become our own central conference, but also context for social principles and the new social principles and how we apply them. We're really optimistic about that piece getting through. And I think also, which would help us is as we streamline that book of discipline, how our local churches live into that understanding, how our conferences live into that understanding can affect you and your ministries that you are offering at your local church level and beyond. There were a couple other things I wanted to say about the social principles and then also about structure. The social principles, you can access all of these on the General Conference 2020, and you can try putting in 2024, you might get it, website and see that. You could also get it through Church and Society. You can Google Church and Society and they'll be glad to post that for you. I'm really optimistic about some of the ways in which they've really grasped some of the concerns from the pews, the social issues that have been brought to them from our pews, they're listening to, and they've really done a good job tapping into those. So at this general conference, we will have the standard committee on, let's say Church and Society, COSRO, which is Committee on Status and Role of Women, United Women in Faith. They're going to bring all of those social issues they always do about the girl child and voting rights and women's rights and access to health and mental health. Those are going to be asked to be renewed. So some of those are coming. But there's also some new ideas out there, especially having to do with LGBTQI+, plus the children's aspect of that, which I think is really good. There'll be ministry opportunities for children and youth. So these are kind of ways in which the pew has spoken up and Church and Society has listened and kind of added some of those contexts into the new social principles, which is kind of exciting. If we look at structure of the church, we have boards and agencies, and some of those have been streamlined out of necessity, as we've known. It's been a long process. When I was on the Board of Global Ministries, we started that process 10 years ago, streamlining getting our boards smaller, getting the detailed context of what each board and agency does more defined. What we're finding now with disaffiliations and the shrinking of 20% of our denomination, we're finding that those boards and agencies are smaller yet, and what they'll be able to do is smaller yet. So like our relationship perhaps with the board is discipleship, or again, church and society, or global ministries. Some of those have been paired together, like global ministries and higher ed has been gone together. And there'll be some other condensing of some of the agencies that supply us with resources and help fulfill some of our needed questioning and material needs. So we're going to see some of that change, as well as context within WestPath, who deals with our financial investments and pensions for our staff, and could be your pension plan as well. So we're seeing that is in progress. There's a lot of legislation that is looking at trying to make that as effective as possible within the constraints of budget that we obviously are going to have. I know that was a lot to throw at you, so I'm open for any questions that you might have specifically. I just want to say before we do that, Carrie, know that your delegation has been very open to discussion and questions from you. So we had a listening session a couple weeks ago, but we are at your disposal. You can get all of our contact information on the Michigan website under delegation, and you can write letters to us, contact us, even at General Conference. We are open to hear from you. So if you have something you're following online and you have a question or whatever, we will try our best to get back with you while we're in progress or before.